Ooh, it's showtime. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heart and Mind. I'm Dr. Dina McMillan, and if I seem really excited today, I am. This is episode 39, and I call it Unveiled because today we're going to be decoding intelligence tactics with Brian O'Shea. So, this is an episode you do not want to miss. If you have people that you care about that need this information, and remember, they can watch it and you can watch it again later. It is recorded, it is live, so you can call in and write in and get your questions and comments there, but it's also recorded. This is one you don't want to miss. Now, what am I promising you? I'm promising you no more boring Tuesdays. Most people, I made the show on Tuesday because it's the one day most people at 8 o'clock on Tuesdays, most people are like, I'm just going home. I've got the rest of the week, 3 days left. Oh my God. Now you have something to look forward to. So we're here every Tuesday night. Now I say 8 p.m. Eastern time. So if you're Central time, it's 7 p.m., 6 p.m. Mountain time, and 5 p.m. Pacific time. So, and for people like my friend Melinda in Australia, the show is actually on Wednesday at either 10 a.m. or 11 a.m., depending on where you are. On the East Coast, whether you have daylight savings or not. But I have people actually tuning in from Australia, from New Zealand, and from the UK, where it is 1 o'clock in the morning. So I guess I have all those people with insomnia in the UK, because I do work in the UK as well, who want to be involved. Now, if you haven't watched the show, or if you just need a little reminder, I am not a clinical psychologist, so I don't have people sitting on my couch telling me all their problems from childhood. We do something a lot different and much more sinister. What we study is how people learn. Okay, that seems innocuous. But we also study how people are influenced, persuaded, manipulated, coerced, indoctrinated, and brainwashed. Now, you might say, okay, it's good that people study that, but we don't just study that. We actually do experiments where we actually use these methods and figure out how we can change someone's beliefs and behaviors, usually trying to do it without alerting them that it's an external force that has changed their mind or made them pick up that product. As you can imagine, most social psychologists don't do what I'm doing. This is the only show that offers this. Most social psychologists either work in marketing, getting you to buy things you don't really need, or they work as political advisors, getting you to vote for someone you don't really trust. I'm on the side of the angels, and that's why this show is so important. Now, speaking of important information behind the scenes, which is our theme for today, be sure to get your own copy of the Pfizer papers. You can easily get it on Amazon. It is so thoroughly and rigorously researched. It brings to the light information that Pfizer actually went to court to try to quash and keep quiet for 75 years. They were unsuccessful. So Naomi Wolf, Amy Kelly, and her team took the time to go through all of that paperwork and bring it to you so you understand a lot of what happened during those important COVID years. Now, because today is all about this, please understand you can reach me to either add a question, present an idea for a topic, or hire me. I am actually a social psychologist, and what I do keynotes, lectures, seminars, workshops, not just on my Unmasking the Abuser program, which is still the only domestic violence prevention program in the world. I also do training workshops on my Healing the Rift program, which is a program, a non-political program designed to increase teamwork and team harmony without telling people you have to change your underlying values. How do you get people who are very different to work, working together? That's what Healing the Rift is all about. And I also am an expert in gambling harm. So if that's something you want to know about, I'm right now interviewing people trying to get my new website up. Easiest way to reach me is on X. Now, today is exciting. I'm so excited. I had a chat with Brian, and poor guy, I would not let him go because he was just so interesting. You're getting a chance today to hear him talk about a little of what he knows. He's going to be talking about decoding intelligent tactics. We're going to have him on soon. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. Have you seen the latest fluoride headlines about the impact of fluoride in the water supply? The future of oral care isn't fluoride, it's peptides. The wellness company just launched the first ever peptide paste that regenerates gum tissues, strengthens enamel, and naturally whitens your teeth. It's called Smile, a doctor-formulated breakthrough that works with your body's natural repair process. This advanced formula blends targeted peptides with blue spirulina, aloe vera, and powerful remineralizers to boost blood flow, stimulate collagen, and help rebuild lost gum tissue, all while gently whitening without sensitivity. No fluoride, no peroxide, no artificial dyes. Just real clean ingredients that fight bad bacteria and support a healthier mouth from the inside out. Ready to upgrade your oral health? Experience the future of oral care with Smile and get 10% off plus free shipping. So now, head to dailycloudhealth.com and use the code DailyCloud. Take action today for a healthier tomorrow. Now, I also wanted to mention to everyone, if you want a quick guide into the tactics used to lure millions of people into toxic relationships, I tried to figure out the easiest, fastest, most effective, and least expensive way to do that. So I created an ebook called Brief Overview of Abusers' Strategies and Tactics. And because I am presenting information most people don't think about, remember, this is social psychology, NLP, behavioral psychology, but it's all accessible, lots of great pictures, less than 60 pages, and it includes how abusers select their targeted partners. So go head to Amazon and look for the brief overview of abusers' strategies and tactics. Now, all of us really want to know what's really going on. That's why this show is here. That's why Brian does his work. That's why all of us, nobody can be, well, that's not true. We do know a lot of people that still believe everything they're told by the TV. But a lot of us looked at how COVID was handled. It was so heavy-handed that it alerted a lot of people, even people who are normally quite trusting, to say, what's really going on behind that curtain? And you see these pictures. This is from The Wizard of Oz, when Toto pulls the curtain back and the wizard says, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. We want to pay attention to the man behind the curtain. So I want to talk to you a little bit. I could do a half hour on Brian's qualifications. He's extremely impressive. Brian O'Shea has spent almost 30 years in the field of military intelligence, U.S. government intelligence, competitive private sector intelligence, private investigations, and executive protection. Brian served in the military for 11 years of active duty service in the Military Intelligence Corps, working for two special forces in the Middle East, North Africa, and throughout Southeast Asia. After his service ended, he worked as a senior consultant and subject matter expert for two of the U.S. government's top intelligence agencies. Brian O'Shea's day job is in the field of private intelligence consulting. And essentially, he gets hired to go after those stealing from his corporate clients. But also, he works with people dealing with stalkers and infiltrators at his clients' companies. Okay, that would be a lot of work. He also hosts Investigate Everything, a show where he goes behind the headlines and investigates everything from corrupt judges and politicians to wrongfully accused suspects and foreign threats to America. Now, this is what I'm going to ask him when he joins us in a moment. I want you to think, what do you want to ask him? Sign in wherever you are. Go on any of the my X page, Naomi Wolf's, Brian's X page, go on Rumble, go on Facebook, the Daily Clout page. What do you want to ask him? Think about it. This is the question I came up with that I wanted to ask him most. What are some of the most important covert influence methods used on the public? So think about it for a second and write it in. And when we come back in a minute, Brian will be joining us. If you've watched this show, you've heard me rave about how much this product has helped me. What about you? Are you ready to move easily and independently without pain or stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a plump, hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Discover Native Path Collagen, made with only type 1 and type 3 collagen fibers, the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen in your body. It's found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut. Types 1 and 3 provide maximum benefits without the need for unnecessary fillers. Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, it's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety. Completely flavorless, Native Path Collagen can be added to anything. Coffee, smoothies, oatmeal, you name it. Its peptide formula makes it more bioavailable, meaning it's absorbed more easily and mixes perfectly without clumping. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals. You can get 3 or 6 packs at a fraction of the price of other brands. Wow! With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, including me, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a trusted choice. Plus, they offer an 800 number for any questions about usage, recipes, or ingredients, and you'll speak to a real person ready to help. Join their private Facebook community to share success stories, recipes, and to support each other on this journey called life. Visit getnativepath.com/dailyclout and start your transformation today. That's getnativepath.com/DAILYCLOUT. Okay, so let's talk to wonderful. Hello, Brian. You're going to have to turn your microphone on.
There we go. That was a wonderful introduction. Yes. And I
Oh.
didn't know that's what bioavailable meant.
Oh, well, now you know.
No, I know.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, let's hear all about the covert influence tactics that are being used on the public. That's why I was so fascinated because this is what I bring every week. I tend to go more towards individual,
Mhm.
family, direct contact, but you have a broader scope and you know what the military, what the government get up to. Ooh, I only have outsider information on that. So, if you could just tell our audience one thing, what would it be?
If I could tell them one thing, and I'm not being kitschy here, I would say investigate everything. Simply
Mm,
because everything now is propaganda. And I mean on the right and the left ever since. I mean, it has been for a long time, but I think more people are more aware of it now. So I
mm,
would say investigate everything, go beyond the headlines, because quite honestly, my good friend Dr. Henry Ely was on the other day trying to explain about these two uh, HHS employees that he's and many people have an issue with. And he kept having to say on X, read. No, actually read the whole tweet. No, read everything. And so what I'm noticing is that
mm.
people just aren't doing the research, and it tends to be the people that are the most educated. I don't know why that is.
I think we've been discouraged. A lot of people, one of the things is even if we have resisted being plugged into the matrix, even if we've resisted most of the influence methods successfully used on those on the left, we are still influenced somewhat. We're not as free as we think we are. We have to stay really vigilant. And one of the
Mm.
things they have discouraged us from doing is looking closely. They have encouraged people to allow someone else to interpret the world for you. And
Mm.
education has nothing to do with it. One of the things I always tell my audience that studying how these things work in the brain, methods of influence and persuasion and coercion are effective according to saturation levels. People think if you're smart, you're safe. No, you have to get away from it. Our brains are in many ways designed to accept and adapt to these methods. So if you don't want it to work on you, you have to pull back. You have to let that neocortex, your problem solving brain, encourage you, discipline you to go back and look closely.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I guess the advice I could give people is, and let me, I'll go in a second. I'll explain the difference between covert influence and propaganda.
Oh, yes,
But what I
yes.
would, yeah, definitely. And so what I would encourage people to do is, and I get this idea from Grant Cardone, the real estate mogul and incredible sales leader. He's very active on X too, a great patriot. But in his book, the 10X rule, one thing he encourages people to do is seek out the things in your day that you're comfortable in, that you're complacent in, and challenge those and put yourself in an uncomfortable position. So, what does that mean? That means in this context, look for the things that you accept almost absent mindedly as reality and then
Mhm.
challenge that reality. An example of this would be, for instance, this country is full of good people. Country X is full of good people. You've been there, you have friends there, and then start looking for ways to challenge your own belief on that thing. Because that's what investigators and intelligence analysts do, is they will try to prove themselves wrong. Too many people try to prove themselves right. And in today's world,
Mhm.
with so much available information, you can always prove yourself right. I can say, Xi Jinping, the leader of China, has two heads, bat wings, and can make two suns appear in the sky. I will find enough, even peer reviewed stuff, to prove that I am right. But proving you're wrong, that's where you find your path to reality.
You have to get used to cognitive dissonance because one of the most common types of bias is the kind of bias where you are looking for things that confirm what you believe. So all of us are drawn to confirmation. But in order to be objective, you have to stand back from it. And an easy way to do this, I think, is when somebody says something and your immediate reaction is to disagree, make yourself go back and ask if they have a point, partial point, maybe a different perspective that needs to be considered. It is extremely uncomfortable at first, but like exercising or stretching, as you do it more, you're able to both anticipate how painful it's going to be and breathe and talk your way through it.
Mm-hmm.
Objectivity
Yeah,
is hard.
mm-hmm. So, and it's really hard because the bad guys, for lack of a better term, or just the people that do covert influence for a living, they even target objectivity, and they play with that. So that leads me right into what is covert influence. A lot of people think of propaganda and covert influence as the same thing. A lot of people think of propaganda and what they call psyops, or psychological operations, as the same thing. They're actually not. Think of psyops and covert influence, which are interchangeable terms, as the building of the record player, whereas propaganda is the record. So what does that mean? What that means is that the goal of covert influence is to train the population to react to stimulus on a mass level. A great example of this is, for instance, a color, a rhythm, and a certain bunch of influencers saying certain things. That gets the people listening to them to start nodding their heads, okay? Mm-hmm. Once you get them to nod their heads to the most ridiculous things, now your covert influence job is done. In comes propaganda. So what did this look like during the pandemic? They started with, they being the powers that be, I believe HHS at the time, started by getting people to think a certain way about COVID-19 itself. As you recall, Dina, there were images of, like the Broadway guy that supposedly lost his leg, and the Chinese videos of people like collapsing on the street, of course, catching themselves if you look really closely. But you're this rhythm, this pattern is over and over and over. And if you notice a lot of the branding on COVID itself, a lot of it was like a certain color. So once people start saying, oh my God, we're all going to die. Well, that's ridiculous if you think about the beginning of COVID-19 when it was like a 99.8% survival rate.
Yes.
But you keep beating that drum, redundancy and repetition. And suddenly people are like, oh my God, people are dying. And then you overwhelm them with imagery of horrible things. You also attack their religion, because if you attack religion, people start to fear death when they otherwise would not have. As a Irish Catholic guy myself, death is inevitable. We're like, oh, that's going to suck. We'll deal with it later. Pass me another Guinness. But right. So suddenly people are terrified of death, and which is crazy because you can't escape it. You can't escape it. Bill Gates and the gang. But the thing is, and the way they drove that point home was things like having the big ship, the big paramedic ship come into New York Harbor, and then showing images of Hart Island, which is off the coast of the Bronx, where they're burying mass casualties. Never mind that the bodies they're burying in those images are actually prisoners. It's an active pauper's grave, in New York. It's been there for a long time. And it's those are prisoners burying other prisoners that can't afford a funeral, or their bodies are not claimed. And then they even had the refrigeration trucks, and people are going out and they're seeing these, and then they're texting me. They're like, dude, it's real. There's refrigeration trucks full of bodies. I'm like, did you see the bodies? No, but why would they have them there? Well,
Yeah.
I'll talk to you on Dr. Dina's show in about 4 years, and I'll explain it then. So, but people started going to this rhythm, and then if you look, then the vaccines came in, and if you look at the branding, it was the same rhythm, it was the same campaign, and then all of a sudden, the vaccines, that's going, and then Ukraine, and my son. And I'll land it on this. My son pointed out something very interesting to me, and he was 10 years old at the time, but he has to listen to this guy with Logorrhea all day long when he's with me. He gets this text message on his phone, and I get one on my phone, and it's about we at the school he was going to are encouraging the students to wear the colors of Ukraine in support of the women and children who are dying in this horrible invasion. He said, Dad, what do you notice about that message? I said, I don't. He goes, scroll up. I scroll up. It's the same number that the COVID messages are coming in on. What do you think of that? You're more versed in the mechanics of this, and that's why we wanted to talk, because you were saying earlier I focus on families and the individual, and in my long drawn out email that I was talking to you on, where I was explaining things, I said so are they, because every real covert influence campaign has to target the individual, but at a mass scale. So think of that not as a shotgun blast. Think of it as a million sniper rifles.
Ooh, well, I know it was, but it was interesting too. But at this, because with my Unmasking the Abuser program, as I mentioned, it's still the only targeted education program that actually has primary prevention. So I actually have identified the exact tactics used by abusers all over the world in every group. And why do they all use the same tactics? Because in order to influence the mind and condition someone psychologically, there are certain things that you have to do, otherwise it doesn't work. So whether they read about it, whether they grew up with it, whether they looked it up, whether it was trial and error, they all use the same tactics. And one of the things that I noted with that is that predators and abusers or predators will often also, especially at the beginning, they will almost be laughing behind their hands. They will show the truth hidden in plain sight. So for instance, we have this virus that they are closing down the world for, but at the same time, they're putting plexiglass up in front of grocery stores and everywhere. When you're going through and getting your groceries from the cashier, there's a plexiglass at the bank, whatever, but they're touching all of your stuff. So
it's plexiglass. It's it's a 2-foot thing of plexiglass. Last I remember, air flows everywhere.
Absolutely, and the masks, even on the side of the box, it says does not prevent against viruses. Yeah. At first, now they stopped doing it, but at first, even the leaders who were being paid to promote COVID measures, because so many world leaders went from having a net worth of a few $100,000 to having net worth of more than $10 to $20 million.
Yes.
And the only thing that changed was that they locked down their population and enforced vaccine measures on their population.
Exactly.
But a lot of them at first mentioned the fact that COVID had a 99.8+% recovery rate, even before the vaccine came out. But they stopped mentioning it once the vaccine, or they mumbled it like they do in pharmaceutical ads, where they talk about it like yes, like that. So they sound like auctioneers where they're trying to talk as quickly as possible in a low tone. Once the vaccine came out, they didn't want you to think about the fact that even if you didn't get the vaccine, you were not going to die from COVID.
Hmm.
They talked about they started calling you names. I know that when I was living in Melbourne,
Right.
Australia during this time, world's harshest COVID measures, we had politicians, celebrities, all of them calling us horrible names, talking about how
Hmm.
we were trying to destroy society because your vaccine wouldn't work unless I was vaccinated too, which doesn't make any sense. So, like abusers, they were hidden in plain sight, which is why my Unmasking the Abuser program works. Because once you can identify the inconsistencies, the revelations that are there, you stand back and said, wait a minute,
Exactly.
wait a minute. Because
Exactly.
it didn't make any sense. Why didn't we have why didn't we have to wear gloves if COVID was that bad? And why didn't they have hazmat disposals for the masks? Why could you just throw it in the garbage? Why could you wear the same mask over and over? And as long as you had a
Why
mask,
could you press in and crowd into a BLM riot and not get it?
yeah,
So,
why did
um,
pride parades and BLM uh, protests not transmit COVID, but anything to do with veterans, anything to do protesting the COVID lockdown
mhm.
measures, they felt justified in arresting people, brutalizing people, shooting them with rubber bullets. If you look at what happened in Melbourne, it
Oh
was
yeah,
it was like something out of the Third Reich. I mean,
I
we had
saw it.
the harshest lockdown in the world, over 260 days, where we were not allowed out for more than an hour. We weren't allowed to go more than 5 kilometers, so basically 3 miles from our homes. We had black clad police officers who would stop us and demand our ID to make sure we weren't
Hmm.
further than 5 kilometers from where we lived, or we would get a fine of like
Well, that's, I
$1,500.
mean, so what that is that's conditioning. And if you really look
Absolutely
at,
conditioned.
and let me really, if you don't mind, explain
No, go for it.
where the overlap here is with my background. So, without going into too much detail, because I legally cannot. So, I was a contractor in the intelligence community after the military. And that's the real reason I can't really talk about too much stuff, is because the relationship between that contracting company, that consulting firm, and the agencies I worked at, that's actually classified. Now, you could go to my LinkedIn profile with all these awesome citizen detectives on both of our shows and probably connect those dots. Okay. I won't say that I ever worked at the Culinary Institute of America, but you could fill in the blanks. So the point is, where does it cross over? Well, let me give you a timeline. And timelines, to answer your other question, are so important because, as you saw in the pandemic, Dina, is people forget, and they forget now. A great example of this is I'm working on that United Healthcare case. We have conservative influencers, saying, off with his head when they talk about the alleged shooter, Luigi Mangione. Then you have people on the left saying he's a hero, he's a martyr, he's going to be a martyr. But going back to the people on the conservative side, I've been screaming at the top of my lungs saying, hey, yo, don't you want due process? Don't you want presumption of innocence? Don't you remember that the very man who is prosecuting this case, one Alvin Bragg, took away due process from Trump and his supporters, from Daniel Penny, tried to take that away, and they wanted due process. But now that the conservatives believe this guy is a lefty, they're saying, "Oh, kill him. He's this is why he did it." It's like there's no presumption of innocence, and they're like, "Oh, he's rallied his troops," and even the DOJ is saying that he committed an act of terrorism because he got his followers to do this. And I'm like, the only thing this guy has said is not guilty. We want due process. And so I'm reminding people, like, hey, go back, bookmark your tweets, and remember that Alvin Bragg did the same thing. And go back to December and realize that Pam Bondi didn't bring these charges at the federal level. It was Merrick Garland. So all the conservatives out there who are cheering on let's kill this kid, they're cheering on their very enemies that they used to hate. And that's why I tell people to keep a close timeline, and that will protect you. But where does the crossover come from in between why we're here and why we're talking about COVID? Well, the reason we're talking about this is, first of all, you have to suspend your idea of what an attack is. A lot of people think of an attack on a population as a kinetic thing, artillery and full-out war. Uniforms.
The fact
Chinese,
that our enemies are not wearing a specific uniform. I consider the Biden administration an enemy force taking over our government. And I look, because I'm an avid World War II aficionado, I look at what the Germans did when they conquered France, and I see so many parallels with what the Biden administration did. Suspending the basic rule of law, ripping out the resources and shipping it somewhere else. All of the things that we were seeing were very similar to what the Nazis did during World War II in France.
Sure.
It was terrifying. But because unlike the Germans, they didn't have on uniforms. So most people didn't recognize that we had been invaded and taken over.
Well, and don't forget that the Nazis also had people operating here in America without uniforms, because that's what you do. Like when you're conducting warfare, you subvert the population and you recruit someone who can get you close to that guy, who knows the guy that operates that air defense artillery module out there in Iraq. So your special forces can go and kill them, and then you can have a successful initial bombing of Baghdad. And that's war. That is warfare. But what the Chinese Communist Party really sticks to, and especially if you read their manifesto on warfare, their new direction of warfare called unrestricted warfare, which is really just rehashing the 36 stratagems of war, which are the manifesto that's 3,000 years old. They talk about focusing on the software of war rather than the hardware. You mentioned the uniforms and the guns and the tanks. That's the hardware of war. The software of war is the purpose. Why are we doing it? If the goal is to gain land, they don't care how they get there. Their goal is clearly stated. They want to be the global hegemon by 2049. And that is called the China Dream. Why am I bringing up China? Because I think you mentioned, the Bidens and everything are the enemies. Yes, they are useful idiots, either witting or unwitting. Ultimately, everything that we see happening is literally going according to script with what the Chinese Communist Party has publicly put out. And so that's where we get into covert influence. So little history on this. So I went into, why was I involved, allegedly, in that type of work? Well, I came out of the military in 2003. The war on terror, or enduring freedom, was hot. That was the hot war at the time. I just returned from the Philippines after 9 months sleeping on a badminton, on a cot in a badminton court in Zamboanga, and dealing with a group called the Abu Sayyaf group, which is interesting in itself because there's actually a group down there called the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or I'm not making a crude joke, but known as the MILF, who are 30. It's a real thing. I had a guest on. He didn't believe me. He thought I was joking. It's a real thing. But they're 3,200 people in the southern Philippines, highly organized, chains of command, uniforms, everything. And then there's the Abu Sayyaf group. At best, it was 49 people. Okay, but two things they had going against them. A, they had taken Americans hostage. Martin and Gracia Burnham, these missionaries. You may recall this back in around 2002. When the missionaries were taken hostage with a bunch of people. And in my opinion, they just sounded more Islamic. So that's how we were able to sell the Enduring Freedom Asia part, was it's Abu Sayyaf group. You can't say the Moro Islamic Liberation Front or the MILF because no one's going to buy that. But you can say Abu Sayyaf, father of the sword. So anyways, we get there. That's about 2003. So what happens in 2011? In 2011, Osama bin Laden is killed in Pakistan. Now, up till then, I'd been out of the military since 2003, and I may or may not have been working in a field where we were trying to convince entire populations to turn against terrorist groups, to get young kids to not join a terrorist group, to become a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, something productive. So how would we do this? Because if you have ever seen a terrorist hard drive, if you've ever seen a chat group during the War on Terror, that was the thing. It was trendy to support terrorists. Oh, wait a minute. That's happening now with our own left wing in this country. That aside, but people were actually using on some of these hard drives I've looked at, they were actually using Mujahideen lingo to pick up women online. I won't get into the details, but it was real. So how do you get through that? Well, you have to change someone's entire reality, and that's what was done. Is you take over the reality. Now, this might sound familiar, and we're getting to the crossover. You recruit actors, imams, musicians, graffiti artists, radio show hosts. You recruit people who are just really popular in their small community. You buy soccer teams, you buy sports teams, you buy stadiums. You buy the space for the movie on that flight that goes from the Middle East to Korea. And you play your movie. Oh yes, the movie that you created, which is packed with covert influence messaging. And slowly, as people at first doubt your message, when it's all around them, not only on TV or on the internet, but all of a sudden it's coming from their neighbor. Hey man, terrorism's bad. Hey man, get the shot. All of a sudden you start doubting yourself. You start doubting your own reality. You know the shot is bad. You know that vitamin C works. You know that staying inside with a shared HVAC unit with a 30-unit high-rise in the Bronx, that's probably not going to help you not get sick. But it's all around you, so you start nodding your head to that rhythm. Okay, so that's where I specialize. Put that back on counterterrorism. So then what happens? 2011, Osama bin Laden gets killed. 2013, the Smith-Bunt Modernization Act is passed. What is the Smith-Bunt Modernization Act? It's basically taken the Smith-Bunt Act, which was an act that prohibited the government from the U.S. government from propagandizing American citizens. I know it very well. It was very limiting, but that's fine. Smith-Bunt Modernization Act in 2013 removed that prohibition, among many other things. Okay, and that's HR 5736 if people are interested in learning more about that. So by 2014, I started noticing a trend in the intelligence community because I got out around 2013-ish, but I started noticing a trend. No one was really talking about terrorism anymore. Yeah, there were a couple ISIS mentions and stuff like that, but I could see the budget sinking. How could I see this if I was out? That's easy. Go to intelligencecareers.com or go to usajobs.opm.gov and see how many positions are open. They started shrinking. People started calling me and saying, hey, do you have any work for me? Because I successfully migrated my resume into a parallel field in the private sector. People didn't know how to do that, so they're calling me. That's when I knew something was going on. They were downsizing the contractor force first, and that's where they start. So then all of a sudden, in 2014, another really interesting thing happened. So as I saw this focus on counterterrorism go down, and I saw the influence assets, which I can't get into in the platforms, but I saw those going offline, which is a very lonely place when you see it and you can't tell anyone. Like, hey, wait a minute. All of a sudden, 2014, Health and Human Services, they start a little program called Vaccine Confidence Activities, after they did a study realizing vaccine uptake is really, really low. So I didn't pay much attention. I was very busy. Flash forward to 2020. Naomi and I, my wife Naomi Wolf, were hanging out. She's like the Oracle of Delphi. She predicted everything. She's like, they're never gonna let us out, and I'm like, that's ridiculous, and she was right. So then I started noticing actors, music, a recreation of reality. I started hearing people say, hey, vitamin C doesn't help you. Vitamin D doesn't help you. Fresh air doesn't help you. Stay inside. Stay alive. I started seeing the same rhythm, and I looked at Naomi and I said, there's something going on here. And she's like, how do you know? I said, well, I kind of worked in a similar field, and this looks just like it. As a matter of fact, with the enhancements I wrote into that program,
Oh my
including
God.
including graffiti on the walls, because it's about creating the reality that the client wants. And for those who want to doubt it, you can literally go to CDC to this day and find, just Google vaccine confidence activities engaging the arts. They actually engaged graffiti artists to paint pictures of people with masks on in every city to recreate reality. And that's
Well,
what
not just
happens. So,
that. If you went,
what's that?
if you're like me and you um, do a lot of creative, you noticed and you made a comment about before the show about me always putting together all these slides and all this imagery because, and this converges with what you're talking about. One of the reasons I've told my audience that I always have slides and imagery with on my show is because studies have found we have a visual superiority effect. So while our
Mm,
logical rational brain may process written information, it may process language, there's another two parts of our brain, two out of the three parts of our brain are much more responsive to imagery.
mm,
So having this, I am always putting imagery in everything I do. I actually have taught seminars for my unmasking the abuser, and I don't do it quite as much now because I want people to be able to go back and remember what was there. So I'll actually have words written on it. But I actually would do entire seminars just using slides with images on them as I spoke. It was mainly because people kept stealing my data. But in
mm.
2020, um, I noticed that everywhere I looked, every time I tried to get images of people, they were always showing people with masks on.
Hmm.
So it was everywhere. So when you showed successful people, you showed happy people, you showed anything, everything was filled with people with masks on. So they were trying to normalize, and the way the brain works, it will normalize, first normalize, and then adapt to whatever it's repeatedly exposed to, especially if the most effective methods are used, which include imagery, storytelling, and music.
Yes, definitely. And Dina, you just mentioned the mass, and I just thought of something.
Mhm.
I found it strange that when they made a series, I believe it was HBO, made a series of one of my favorite movies and comic books called The Watchmen.
Mhm.
For some reason, all of the good guys in that, and this is like a year or a few years before COVID, the pandemic, they all wore masks. And they had a really flimsy excuse for why they wore masks, like so they can live their life without being identified. I'm like, but that's idiotic because you have a name tag. So, and I
They were
remember Naomi point.
normalizing. They were
They were
normalizing it
normalizing,
before. They were normalizing it. So you have
possibly,
to lay
yeah.
the groundwork. You have to lay the groundwork.
Hmm.
So they were, it was, if you study what happened during, as I said, me and my World War II, and don't just think I'm strange. What happened, I went to
I
military
don't think
parents,
you're strange.
went to high school in Germany. Yeah, but we are strange too. So went
You're
to high
like
school.
You're like the female Jack Reacher, man.
I went to high school in Germany, and then my father got transferred back to the States, and we lived in Brooklyn, New York, in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. So I wanted to know, why do these people not get along? Started looking at World War II stuff and just got captured by it. But if you look at what the Nazis did, They didn't start with the death camps. They started by normalizing oppression,
Yep.
marginalization, othering of the Jews in the early 30s, as soon as
Yeah.
they gained power. So it was another 8 years before the strict rules happened. But they got people used to it, and that included they had musicals, they had films, all of this showing how evil the Jews were and how the Jews were all coming
Hmm.
after him. So they even people who objected and said, wait a minute, I know a lot of nice Jewish people, this doesn't fit. It was less shocking when the rules came because they had actually been exposed to the same information as the people who complied.
Yeah, it's a
So
slow boil.
it's a slow boil. So they have to normalize things. And I have
Hmm.
seen it happen. Once I became a social psychologist, I started really unplugging myself from a lot of things. I know that
Hmm.
for me, I can tell what the new trend is going to be by who's not getting funding. So a
Sure.
lot of the things that I object to that people are like, oh, you're so conservative. I'm not super conservative. I'm just knowledgeable. And
Hmm.
one of the things I noticed is that objective analysis of trendy groups, groups that are now trendy, losing a little bit of trendiness with Trump, but the groups that have been taking over, it started 20 years ago when people were no longer allowed to analyze or examine the validity of the propaganda that these groups were putting out. The only people who got funding were people who supported that propaganda, who supported the narrative.
Sure.
And people will actually stand there and see just a complete contrast between what the propaganda says and what is happening in front of their
Hmm.
faces. And they
They
will
can.
not process it because they've been indoctrinated and we're all subject to it. It's why I'm careful because the first thing they taught me in grad school was that knowledge of a phenomenon does not make you immune to its effects.
Oh, that's a good
First,
line. I like that. It's
so
true.
I if I don't get away from it, I'm just as vulnerable as anybody else.
Well, let me tell you how we get there. This is how the operation works because I know everyone wants to hear that. Okay, so where do you
Great.
start with any operation, whether it's attacking a bunker or mass manipulating an entire population? Everything starts with intelligence. So the first thing you do is your customer research. Okay, what are people's pain points, as they say in sales? What are people scared of? If they're not scared of anything, what can we make them scared of? And then you go more tactical. Once you've established a broad, customer profile or population profile, you got to get people on the ground. Okay, you got to get people not only on the ground to recruit media heads and radio heads and every manner of influencer, but you've got to get people in the communities. You got to get people at the mosque, or in our cases, the church, the mosques, and the synagogues. You've got to get them in there. Now they're there to get a sense of what's making this population tick. So think about it this way. You have an entire directive. A directive normally comes from the top boss, president, maybe someone higher, and that directive will be get everyone vaccinated, or that directive will be get everyone to, let's see if we could get everyone to turn on their neighbors for not wearing a mask. Okay, but at the higher level, it's going to be get everyone vaccinated, make them comply. Then the level beneath that, the cabinet levels, they're going to separate those into tasks. Okay, HHS, your job is to sow the fear because people are scared in this country of being sick or dying. Think about how many pharma ads there's always been on everything. Okay, everything. It's pharma ads from the time I can remember. Get them scared. Well, that's a problem, right? Because a lot of people don't watch TV. A lot of people aren't on the internet. So how do you get at them? Okay, that's where you get into the Department of Agriculture. That's where you get into the Food and Drug Administration. That's where you get into back to HHS, where you talk about gun violence. So let's get them scared of COVID, right? How do we get the hunter in Pennsylvania scared of COVID. He's out there hunting. He doesn't care. He's beautiful trees around. He doesn't care. Maybe say there's COVID in deer. And that's exactly what they did. A lady named Barbara Hahn at the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies released that very same report. Now, she finished it in June of 2021, but they released it in October. And what's October in Pennsylvania, New York, Northeast?
Hunting season.
Bingo. They released it then, and that's, if you go back to that media and Newsweek and everything like that, it's all, can wildlife be a super spreader, or white-tailed deer have COVID? Remember that?
Yes, I do. Whoa.
Barbara Hahn also is part of a project of 11 different locations in this country, multiple locations in the world, 11 different places, and it's called bat1health.org. Okay? Now, guess who one of her collaborators was on past projects? Peter Daszak, the CEO of EcoHealth Alliance, the guy who was the bag man for the NIH, who just opened another nonprofit. But she also, at the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies, which is 20 minutes from my house up in upstate, they have this bat1health.org. Okay? And so all of a sudden, their job is to make you scared of nature. Now, who's that going to affect? It's not going to affect people in the city. They don't care. They care about nature, but they're not, where it's going to affect people that live in nature. People like Naomi and I, when we're not in the city, we're surrounded by nature. How can we stay inside? How can they get us to stay inside? Make us scared of the wildlife. And that's exactly what they did. Okay. And so you could see the way it breaks down. You got Department of Ag, you got Department. So then you get, now you have to get people who maybe aren't on the internet, right? Older people. How do you get them? That's easy. You do TV, you network television. You bombard them with fear. But how about the people that don't watch TV or get on the internet because they're very, very religious? Well, that's okay. You form an entire project that's focused on churches, synagogues, and mosques, which is on the CDC's website. And I believe it's like, the acronym is sick. It's like PRAISE or something like that. But it exists. It's there today. And I'll get you all these links so people can look them up. So you see, they covered the entire reality. But now you have to get people, you got to anchor it. You can't anchor things just by broadcasting. And so people know the Jimmy Kimmels, the Fox News host saying, get the vaccine, with that reassuring nod. That's the propaganda. That's the broadcast. But the thing that got people to nod with them is the covert influence. It's setting up the record player. So I'll land this really quickly because I don't want to hog your mic. But so then you have to make it a reality. Things online are not reality. Anyone knows that. If you spent 6 hours online and then you pull yourself away and you go outside and you talk to your neighbor who's wearing the Harris Waltz shirt and he helps you fix your plumbing. You don't hate him. You don't hate them. It's just neighbors. But if you're in the computer, that's the world they control. So you go outside, you go to reality. But what if all of a sudden that person you trust, regardless of their partisan bias, is saying, hey, man, COVID will kill you. And you're like, oh, that's bonkers. And then you go to the bus and you're sitting next to a guy who seems pretty interesting and pretty smart, or a girl. And they're like, oh my God, I'm sorry, I lost my uncle to COVID. He lost his legs first. And then now it's real. It's like, oh shit, this is happening. Now you're not seeing it. But see, that's where the recruiting on the ground community influencers come in. So how do you get those people on the ground? Now, hypothetically, you could maybe start a vaccine confidence door knocking program. I'm not saying Jennifer Psaki ever said that from the podium, but wait a minute, she did.
Oh my gosh.
So that's how you do it. But here's what people should think about. This is where there's overlap between the intelligence community, and yes, the FBI is a member of the intelligence community, weirdly. But by the way, no one in the intel community likes the FBI, and no one in the intelligence community likes each other. So that's why so much stuff leaks. Just let's, like anyone that thinks like there's a star chamber with a bunch of people all agreeing, let's subvert the population. They just want their funding. They don't care. So anyways, to wrap this up, so now you've got that going on. And why not do dual use? Because everything the government does is dual use. So if you remember Jennifer Psaki talking about the door knocking program, just to make people aware of the vaccines, all of the firms that they hired were left-wing polling firms. So why not propagandize people to vote a certain way while you're knocking on their door, collecting intel of what's in their house? Maybe there's a gun in there. We'll get that over to HHS as well as over to the ATF. So you see, it's this constant collecting of intelligence. And this stuff, what I love about our audience is I want everyone to prove me wrong and say that didn't happen. Okay? I want everyone to...
I wish
but
they
so
could.
That's what happens.
Very different directions and came to the same place. I mean, and come on, Daily Clout, we have a really clever audience. I mean, they're just not Jane and Joe average. They are actually thinking, questioning, willing to experience the cognitive dissonance that happens when you come across something that actually belies your existing beliefs and you don't immediately dismiss it. You experience the pain, you stand back, you take a deep breath, and you go closer and say, okay, was I wrong? So that's what we have. We've got an audience that will actually look at something and say, was I wrong? Yeah. But they're discerning and assessing enough to actually look at the data, not just assume it. Everybody says it.
And, I think the danger now, Dr. Dina, is right now, people really need to do the thing I said at the beginning of the broadcast, and that's challenge the thing that you're complacent in. You have to challenge not only liberal or Marxist, the kind of interchangeable, but influencers. You have to challenge conservative influencers too. Like, for instance, right now, there's like this online battle going on about Casey Means, the recently appointed and approved Surgeon General. You have some very good voices, my wife included. Nicole Shanahan, Laura Loomer, who, take her for what she's worth, but she's an excellent investigator because she always brings her receipts. You have all these, and you have all these people who are saying, hey, you know what? We're questioning and challenging your choice as Surgeon General. Then all of a sudden you have all these conservative influencers, people I call friends, people I know, people I don't trust anyone, but people that I would give their stuff attention, just blindly saying without sources, oh, you're anti-Maha. Like what? No, like we want to know why you picked her. And Nicole Shanahan actually did a great job just today on Liz Wheeler's show, who Liz Wheeler seems to be one of the Muppets, toeing the line. But Nicole Shanahan did a great job. Very cool, calm, collective, brought her receipts. And she made that point. She's like, we just want to know. But what I'm noticing is, and this is where especially our audience, who I'm not going to say everyone's conservative, they're just smart. They're questioning. They're investigators. They're doctors of
on the left right now.
They're students of social psychology.
But they're willing to question, even if it sets them at odds with the people around them, even if it makes them uncomfortable. They're brave
But what I'm noticing, they're brave. But what's happening is that the conservative side seems to have an army of influencers that will attack people for questioning anything that goes against whatever the line is. And people back down. And, I'm sure that's scarier to some people than getting attacked by the left because, look, the left attacks everything. It doesn't matter. If I get vanilla ice cream, someone gets chocolate ice cream, I'm going to get attacked. We're all used to it. We're numb to it. But it's especially acute because getting attacked by conservatives is new. But remember, everyone, and take this to the bank, every administration, every firm, every business, everyone uses covert influence or what I might call even advanced sales tactics. They have an agenda. They have something they want to get done. It might be a good thing. It might be a bad thing. But these tactics are being used again, and I'm seeing it again, and it's coming from the side I voted on. And that's why I tell people you got to challenge it. You got to investigate everything, because there are people that want you not to question certain narratives. And we have to challenge all of that, because at the center of that, at the center of all these back and forth left and right arguments, at the center of all these influencers, once you get past all them, that's where truth lies. And that's where America lives.
Well, I would also say two things. Number one, we need to be adult about the people we support. We don't have to agree on everything. We are not
Exactly.
Democrats. We don't have to pretend we don't have to have willful blindness and pretend we don't see the errors, the wrong think. If we could disagree and say, I don't agree with them about that, and still provide our support, because I know with Trump, I don't agree with everything he does.
Mm-hmm.
But 9 times out of 10, I do. And I can't remember the last time we had a president that I agreed with so often.
Yeah,
But
nice.
I would also say, do not demand willful blindness and blind compliance and obedience. That is not who we are, and that's not how we thrive in the long term. But
Exactly.
one thing I would add also to that is very consistent in between, I mean, our fields differ in some ways, but one of the things you brought to attention today, and one of the ways my program, my abuse program differs from everyone else, is because everybody else starts with the bad act. Here's the bad act. This is what the bad act happened. I start with the prep. How did this happen? Where did this person come into it? It's why even in my brief overview, I tried to keep it less than 60 pages. It's like 55 pages with photos on every page.
Yeah.
But part of it is the selection process. How does it start? What were they thinking when they chose you? You've got to go back from the event that you noticed and start asking yourself, okay, where was the setup? Even just asking our audience to consider that everything you notice has been set up, and start noticing the setup. That's where your power lies. Because if you're going to nip something in the bud, if you're going to stop the influence tactics from being effective, it is far easier to throw them off balance when you catch them using the setup, when you catch them putting the record player together, to use Brian's example, than if you're waiting until they're playing the record over and over and over and say, hey, wait a minute, I don't want to hear that song anymore. Look to see how they set it up. Look backwards and say, how do they set this up? Because then you'll catch it next time when they try to set up something else. And those of us who are Trump supporters, we are not Republicans. We are Trump supporters. We've got to do this better. And that means if we disagree with each other, if we disagree with our president, whom we respect and whom many of us love, we need to be able to tell him without turning on each other.
And do you know that that's what Trump respects the most? I've met him.
Absolutely. He's a good guy.
If you just nod your head, if you just nod your head, you get fired. He wants people to question.
No, because I know that I'm for myself, and I'm going to be doing a show. I also spoke with Brian, everybody, before the show, that I have done research and put together a program about true alpha males, which is information that everybody needs to have, because we need true, if we have male leaders, they need to be true alpha males. All of the other types, the alpha minor, alpha imitator, beta, different types of beta males, they are dangerous to have in a leadership position. But you've got to be able to tell the difference between them. But one of the differences you see is a true alpha male will take no for an answer. They will actually, if you tell them you're wrong and you bring receipts, they'll look at the receipts. Even if they initially say, oh, go on with you, they'll take a deep breath. Okay, come on, let me see what you got. That's how we all have to be, because that's going to take us forward. So I told you, I warned you, everyone watching this, see how hard it is to stop talking to Brian? See how hard it is? He's so
I could talk about this stuff forever.
fascinating. I just
Hey, by the way,
enjoyed.
really quick aside, I just have a big reveal. You know,
Okay.
Dr. Dina comes across as very humble, and how's he know this? She was my handler.
Don't you tell people that? Um,
I'm just kidding.
um, and Melinda sent something from Australia saying, really understanding the mechanics of how people are deeply influenced is something everyone should be aware of. Absolutely. Maybe you shouldn't graduate school without doing a subject on this. And Ernest 3218 says, unless they're hiding information, they can't even prove he was in New York at the time of the shooting.
Oh, that's
Wow.
my cousin.
Oh,
That's
okay.
that's
Hi,
my cousin
cousin.
Ernie.
Um, Melinda says the most disturbing thing about COVID is how easy it was. It was well planned, granted, but just so easy in the end because it was well prepared. As
Well, they
Brian
they started it with
revealed to us
9/11.
today, they started it years before. They started preparing the groundwork so that then when they brought out the uniforms and the big guns, people had already been prepared to surrender.
Yeah,
That's why we have to know the warning signs. That's why we have to see the red flags early and stop it
and
before it gets to that point.
yeah, and Dr. Dina, I gotta say, like, I was one of those people. I was in the military when 9/11 happened, and I was like, screw my rights, go get them, go get those guys. And I could hear people saying, wait a minute, your civil liberties. I'm like, these lefties, like I was in the military. I'm like, we got something to do. And I look back on that and I'm like, I can admit to myself, I was a dumbass. I was like, yeah, no, yeah, that's not going to happen ever again. And from that day on, I had like a year and a half, 2 years left. I'm like, that's when the rabies vaccine came out. And I'm like, I kept going to the back of the line on shot day because I have tons of vaccines in me. That's what they do with special forces. Is they literally like it was a handful of shots a month. I don't even know what they put in me. But the rabies thing came out because that was a bad shot, And I'm like, no. And I finally got to the front of the line. I'm gonna have to refuse that. They're like, just take it, God. You're in a special forces unit. It's like everyone's like, come on, dude, we gotta go. And it's like, and the pressure is there. I'm like, yeah, no, not gonna happen. Not gonna do it. And I was scared. I'm like, I'm probably gonna get kicked out of the army for this. Nothing happened.
Well, I just want
And
to mention something too, because of what you said about 9/11. I did an earlier episode of Heart and Mind on fear. I also did an episode of my podcast, my Unmasking the Abuser podcast, on fear, because fear is the easiest way to manipulate someone else. If you can make, and you mentioned it yourself, if you can make someone afraid, it's easier to get them to do something if you're offering them safety. And one of the things I keep reiterating to my heart and mind audience is never make a decision or a choice in heightened circumstances. Not only fear, but also elation. Also, that feeling of unity you get when you're all jumping up and down and you got the same rhythm. You're like, yeah, 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 yeah. Don't make
yeah,
decisions then. You're being
yeah,
controlled by primal drives. And when you calm down and your rational mind take over again, you're going to find out you've been controlled, and what you chose, what you decided, what you agreed to is more probably than not a real mistake. So, Brian, thank you. You're coming back because I know
no,
people have
you're
your
coming to my
questions, and I'm
show.
going on his show. So you
Yeah,
get to ask me then too. But thank you so much for doing this show. I really appreciate it. And we will see you again soon. So, for both of us, you can watch us here on Heart and Mind, investigate everything with Brian O'Shea. And thank you so much for joining me on Heart and Mind. And I will see you again next Tuesday.